Isaiah 42:16 says, "And I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not. I will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make darkness light before them, and crooked things straight. These things will I do unto them, and not forsake them." After I'd become a Christian and I found that text, I realized that was exactly my experience. And it gives me such hope when I think about my testimony as to my unbelieving relatives and all the friends that I have that I know are in darkness and are still blinded by the world and by everything that's happening in the world. And I think it gives me such encouragement that God has promised here that He will bring the blind by a way that they know not. He will lead them in paths that they have not known before, and He will change that darkness into light. And these things will He do and not forsake us. And so even though I've been praying for my family for many years, I know that He's still answering those prayers and that He will do all He can to bring everyone out of darkness and into light. I was born into a family where my father was Catholic, and my mother, although she had been brought up Methodist in the church and gone to church every Sunday, actually 3 times on a Sunday, she had given up her faith in Methodism, and she'd gone up to London to work, and she decided that she would join the Catholic Church. She was flatting with somebody who was Catholic, and she decided that she would go along to church with this lady. And while she was there, the priest started to talk to her, and she got converted into Catholicism. And she did have a conversion experience of a sort. She actually thought that the Catholic Church was the church, and she enjoyed all the mysticism and the mystery of it and all the different things that were not present in the Methodist Church. And so for a few years she did attend the Catholic Church, and that's where she met my father, who was a Catholic. Actually, they met in the hospital because that's where they both worked. And she ended up marrying him, and a few years into the marriage she gave up faith in Catholicism. And so my earliest memory is going to church with my father and my mother staying at home. And I had 3 siblings. I was the oldest, and as we grew up we all hated church. I think it was because it was boring. We just felt, what's the point of it? And I felt that God was so far away. I think the doctrine as well that there's everlasting burning hell really put me off God. I couldn't reason, even as a child, that somebody could live for 70, 80 years and then they would burn forever in hell if they didn't make it. And I was never quite sure what you had to do to make it to heaven, because there was all these stories of purgatory. You would be tortured eternally, then you might actually move into heaven if you paid some money and you did enough praying. And so it was very vague to me how you actually made it to heaven. So I was always a bit afraid of God. And I think many times when we went to church, we just felt like we were forced as we got older. And then our dad gave us a choice, and I think when I went to university I still kept going because of the habit of it. But then in the holiday at university, my sister and I decided that we were going to travel Europe by train. And so we got this Interrail pass for a month, and we decided that we were just going to go to major cities in Italy, Austria, France. And we got to the Vatican, we got to Rome. And the 2 friends that were with us were really eager to see the Vatican. And both of us, my sister and I, had been put off Christianity because of Catholicism. I was still going to church. My sister had actually stopped going to church. And she was quite anti-Catholic, and we really didn't want to go to the Vatican, but we did it because our friends were with us. So we went in, and the building was huge, and it was just dripping with gold. There was gold everywhere. There were loads of people there, and at the same time there was all these riches and luxury in there. They had an evil presence about the place. There's black pillars with these twisted snakes supporting them, and at the top of each black pillar there's a big bird with its mouth open ready to pounce on its prey. And I just felt like there was an evil atmosphere in the place. There were lots of black confessional boxes down the side, and priests going in and out, and people queuing to say confessions to the priests. And then we went outside, and there was this beggar on the train with no arm, and it was quite tear-jerking. My sister got quite upset, and it was very emotional. And we saw them selling all these things on the top of the Vatican. They had trinket stands. They were selling pieces of the cross and bits of paper the saints had licked. And we looked at all this, and we just thought, if this is Christianity, we don't want it. Then the next day we went to hear the Pope in the square, and we saw hundreds of people bowing down to this man as he blessed them on it was Easter Sunday. And we both felt like this is just not where God is, and if this is what God is all about, then we don't want to know God. And so I went back to university, and we could see the inconsistencies. There seemed a lot of money available in this church, and yet there were beggars in the street with no arms outside, begging all over the place in Rome when we were travelling round. And I got back to university and I stopped going to church. I just thought, I don't believe what this church teaches. I don't feel God's in there. And I'm just going for the social life. So I stopped. I got very much into drinking, immoral lifestyle at university. And by God's grace, by my Catholic upbringing, I was able to keep myself fairly morally pure, because there was always something that stopped me from going too far. But at the same time, I used to get very drunk, and I was miserable. I was looking for something, but I had rejected God. And I see, looking back, a couple of times when God really tried to get my attention. A friend on my corridor, the only one on my corridor who was Christian, there were about 13 of us. When I got there, I realized everybody but her, me, and one other person were sleeping around. And she was a Christian, and she basically tried to get me and my friend into going to Christian meetings. It was on a Friday night, and I just said, no, I'm not going, because that was when the disco was, and I liked to go and drink and dance. So I would go there instead, and many times she'd invite me. And then they had this special series of meetings on campus during the week. And she said, why don't I come along? So I went along, and it was Nicky Cruz, the famous evangelist who had become a Christian under the ministry of David Wilkerson back in the 60s. And he told his story, how he used to be a gangster, how he used to shoot people, and he'd actually killed people, and how Christ changed his life. It was a very emotional testimony. I went to the front in tears, and went off into a room, and someone tried to make me sign something to do Bible studies, and I was kind of woke up at that point and thought, this is emotional blackmail, this is not what I want to do, and I just left the place. So I see there, God was trying to get my attention, I just left. And then a second time, I wore contact lenses at the time, and contact lenses were quite expensive for a student especially. And one day I was cleaning them in the sink, and this contact lens fell out of my hand and went down the sink, and I didn't know what to do. I was thinking, my parents are really not going to be happy if I lose these contact lenses, because they're very expensive to replace. And so I'm standing there in the sink thinking, what shall I do? And student sinks and student properties, you know what they're like, they're filthy. So I was thinking, I unscrew the U-bend if it's in there. And I just said, if there's a God in heaven, help me find this contact lens. And I unscrewed the U-bend of the sink, and it was full of hair and dirt and filth. And I'm scraping this out, and in the bottom of the U-bend is my contact lens. And I looked at it, and I remember thinking, oh my God, there's a God. And that was all I could think. I just thought, there is a God in heaven, because I had prayed this prayer. But very quickly I forgot about that, and I had my contact lenses, and I went on with my life. But I only remembered that I had done that when I became a Christian. So I see several times he kept trying to get my attention, but I just wasn't listening. And then at the end of university, we decided that my sister and I, that we were going to travel the world together. And so I worked a year at home, because I'm a year older than her, and I got some money together, and we both decided we were going to get work visas for America and then travel on to Australia, where we would work for the majority of the time. And so we met up together, we flew to America, and she worked in a few states away from me as a cleaner in hotels and motels, and I was a nanny for 3 months, which was really hard. The baby was quite hard to look after, and it was a long day every day of the week for like 3 months. So then we met up, we had this pass to travel America, and we went from city to city, and we saw rock concerts, we went out drinking, and my sister was smoking at this point. And then we decided we were going to go on to Hawaii and on to Australia. So we arrived in Hawaii. My sister was very sick at that point, and so she really enjoyed the fact that we had a hotel to stop over, because we'd been staying in all these youth hostels, backpackers, and here we had this nice hotel with an ensuite. So I just saw how somebody's hand was over us in this time, but we were totally rejecting God at this point. And we got to Australia, and we had a work visa. We had an initiation program for 3 days, and then we were sent off to look for jobs anywhere in Australia where we wanted to go. So we travelled up the coast with 2 people that we met. We bought one of these camper vans, as people do, and drove up to the Surfers Paradise. And when we got up there, we looked for work, and we both got jobs, and they're miserable jobs. My sister had to get up very early to work in this fruit market, and we were really not happy. We were both very overweight and miserable with our lives. We were writing postcards home saying, having a wonderful time in Australia, when really we were miserable. We were eating junk food, drinking, and it got to the point where we travelled up to Kakadu National Park. We went on a great tour of there. My friend flew out from England and met us, and we had a wonderful time going around the waterfalls in Kakadu and camping under the stars and doing things that people would love to do, some people can't do and haven't got the time and money. And yet deep down inside there was a big hole. And it was at this point, before she flew out, that we got into reading books by Shirley MacLaine. A friend that we travelled up the coast with was very into déjà vu experiences, and she said that sometimes she goes to places and she feels that she's been there before, she's seen it in her dreams, and just through talking to her, we went to this bookshop and we saw New Age books, and we decided to buy Shirley MacLaine's Testimony. We were very into the movies at this time. We would go to the cinema once a week, at least, probably to escape from ourselves and to see a different side of life. And so we knew who Shirley MacLaine was. She was very famous and she was acting at that time. And we thought, well, let's get her autobiography and see what she's got to say. And through the book, we began to read this and we got sucked into the New Age movement. She began to tell how she was a Christian and how supernatural things happened to her in her life that she couldn't explain. She started mixing with different people who were meditating, and various experiences happened to her that she could not explain. It was like supernatural. And in the book, she's very skeptical to start with when this first starts happening. And then gradually in the book, her barriers come down and she starts to see, well, there must be people in the afterlife. There must be spirits out there that can contact us, because people come to her in her life to tell her things that they couldn't possibly have known humanly unless they were in touch with something outside of the natural course of things. So she begins to let down her barriers, meditate herself, get in touch with her spirit guide. And at the time, I was reading this and my skepticism was sort of seeping away as I began to read her story. And it's written in such a way that you're pulled into this thing. So I began to meditate. My sister read it as well. We began to meditate together. And we weren't getting anywhere. We weren't hearing our spirit guides. We were not hearing voices. We didn't see anything. Except one day my sister heard a voice saying that she was God. And that was the only thing that happened to her. And so we found it wasn't really helping that much. But we kept on reading her books, and then we got other New Age books saying how people were channeling. And channeling is where you go into a trance and you allow something else to speak through your body. And at this point they were channeling the apostles from the Bible, and John and Peter, and they were coming back saying that we need to love one another. And different principles were coming through in this. And at that time, I was working at a weight loss clinic with another girl who invited me home for the weekend into the bush where she lived. And I went, and her mother was a Christian. And I was really anti-Christian. But this Christian mother, she began to warn me. She said, you shouldn't be reading books like that. And there are spirits out there, but you need to go through the Holy Spirit. There are wicked spirits out there. And I was thinking, oh no, she's a Christian. She's just worrying over nothing. But she shook me up a little bit, because I had got a Catholic upbringing. I had some knowledge of God. So I knew that there was a God and there were angels, and here was this woman warning me. So I went back to work and I just sort of shelved it. And then as I was reading Shirley MacLaine's book one day, she has this vision where she sees her higher self. And this is your spirit guide that's supposed to lead you. It's called higher self, and they abbreviate it to HS. And it's only afterwards I made the connection that this is just a substitute Holy Spirit. This is something that's supposed to guide your life and help you. And she sees this being in vision one day. She's in meditation, and the being has wings, long blonde hair, and is androgynous, which means not male or female. And she's looking at him, and I call him him, but he's looking at her, smiling in a wicked way. And she looks at him and she thinks, well, you're my higher self. You're supposed to help me. You're not supposed to be laughing at me. And she gets an uncomfortable feeling. And as I'm reading this description, I'm thinking, this sounds like Lucifer. And growing up, I don't remember learning anything about Satan. I just knew that the devil was some kind of two-horned creature with a long forked tail. And so I was impressed that the Lucifer was a fallen angel, and I knew that this was not a good thing. But again, I shelved it. My sister had actually bought a Bible at that time, because the New Age teaches that Jesus went off into India to meditate for 30 years and to go visiting in India and to learn all the art of meditation in the Bible. That's why the Bible doesn't talk much about his first early years. So we had begun to read the Bible. They say that the biblical principles were correct, that so you sow, so shall you reap. And they teach that you can be reincarnated into something else. When you die, you can be born again to a new life as a male or a female, but not as an animal. So they take it one step further than Hinduism, which actually teaches you can be born as anything. But and it begins to explain how some people have certain temperaments and they have a liking for certain things. For example, Shirley MacLaine has this passion for elephants, and she wondered where it was from. And under hypnosis, she went back in time and she saw that in a past life, she was an African jungle boy working with elephants in the jungle. So this explains why now she remembers that memory from the past, and that's why she likes elephants. And for instance, if you don't get on with somebody, there are certain people you meet and you don't like them. Straight away you don't get on. It's because maybe you were married in a past life and you argued all the time. So, I mean, some of these things, when I talk about them now, they sound crazy. But at the time, it was like, this is an answer for why some people like certain things, why some people don't. Where do we get our personalities from? At the same time, we had questions. We were saying that they teach that karma is not good or bad. So that's like, what happens to you is not good or bad. It's just spiritually enlightened or ignorant. So when you go into meditation and you meet a spirit that's not really very friendly, it's because they're not enlightened. And each of us is supposed to be growing on a spiritual journey where we're getting better and better and more enlightened. But we knew as we looked at the world that the world is getting worse and it's in such a mess. How can anybody say that we're getting more enlightened? And there is some logic to the fact that whatever you sow in this life, you're going to reap in the next. And that's what they teach. So if you sow bad karma or bad behavior in this life, you're going to reap it in the next. But at the same time, they deny that there's no good and evil. And yet they talk about bad karma. So you wonder, because any thinking human rational being can see that there is evil in the world, there is wickedness. And so we had questions, but we just carried on. And we went to a camp meeting that was organised by New Agers in Australia, just outside Surfers Paradise. And we were vegetarian at the time because we didn't want to eat animals, because it would affect our consciousness and our ability to meditate. Plus, we were always trying to lose weight, which is probably the real reason we weren't eating any meat. So we went to this New Age camp meeting. And they had 4 speakers. They had a person talking about all crop circles and unnatural phenomenon and how do these things come about. And he had this theory that, alien craft would come down and make these circles in the fields because the wheat that grows in them is much more pure and different things. And then the Hopi Indian came and he talked about Arizona and how in his reserve where he lives, they had UFOs crashed, that NATO had already taken aliens from the crafts and done experiments on them. They were still alive. And that aliens were appearing around the world. And so we thought, well, this sounds all a bit strange, but at the same time that everybody there seemed to be believing what these people were saying. And then the highlight of the day was this woman channeling. Now, she was American and she spoke with a very soft voice. She was very shy generally, but as she began to talk, as she began to meditate, her head began to roll, and then this voice came out of her mouth and said, "Greetings, we are from the Pleiades," which is a star, and it's actually mentioned in the Bible, but it is a star. And she was channeling supposedly an alien from the planet Pleiades. She did this for about 3 hours and talked to people in the audience. The voice that came out of her mouth was completely different from the voice she spoke with normally. And she answered people's questions. She predicted their futures. She talked about the state of the world at that time. It was the time of the Kuwait War. And the aliens were saying that some of us were reincarnated aliens sent back to save the planet. So it was giving us a mission. We are somebody, we're from some other world, and we're here to help the planet get better, and the environment, and how to look after the environment. And lots of different things she said in this time. And when she came out of meditation, she doesn't know what she said. She couldn't remember anything. She has to watch the video herself or hear the tape to know what she said. But it was interesting that she told her story of how she got to be like this. Several times in her dreams, these blue aliens, these blue people had visited her and said, "Can we use your body to give a message to Earth? Because Earth is in danger." And she was terrified, and she said, "No way, you're not using my body to do anything." But after the 3rd time this happened, she went to her sister and discussed it with her. Now, her sister was heavily into New Age, meditating and channeling and everything. And she said, "Well, what if these people really want to give a message to Earth? This is important, you need to say yes." So after a lot of coaxing, she decided that she would agree to this. So she actually gave her consent for this to happen. And I think we need to bear that in mind when we come to realize what was happening to her, that it was her choice to let these people do this, or let these beings so-called do this. At the same time, coupled with that, so that was interesting. We came out of that and we talked to people, and some people said she was acting, other people said that it was real, and we just thought if that was acting, it was excellent. So I had been involved in drama at university. I knew all about acting, and I knew how hard it was to do that. And it seemed so different, her personality, everything was different about it. And we saw no reason why she should be lying. So we thought, well, there are aliens on planet Pleiades and you can have contact with them if you go channeling. At the same time, there was a confirmation to us personally about the supernatural, that there is a supernatural realm. Because my sister went to see a psychic. At the time we had our tarot cards read, and we'd had individual sort of prophecies where they told us we might meet somebody and this would happen to us. But at the same time, my sister went and paid to have a psychic reading with this lady. A year before, my cousin, who was in his 20s, got drowned basically in an accident on the Devonshire coast. There were freak storms in the 1990s. His body was found on the cliffs in the morning. And we had not told anybody this. Here we were, halfway around the world, and this woman began to tell my sister about our dead cousin, basically. She said that he was in heaven. He died in an accident involving water the year before. He had long blonde hair, which he did. His skin disease was better. He had very severe eczema, and he no longer had it, obviously, in this trance. And she said that he's very happy up there, and he can't wait for you to join him. So my sister was a bit shaken, because she thought, how could this woman know all these details about him when we haven't said anything to anyone? And so we began to believe there is a heaven and that our cousin was in it and that you can talk to the dead. So although we were still a bit skeptical, we thought, well, how can you explain these things unless it's true? We never even thought that there was a possibility of being deceived by spirits. And so we came out of that with a strong belief that we are reincarnated, we can talk to the dead, we can talk to aliens. And we went up to the bush in the Northern Territory and we got jobs in the outback. And while we were working there, we were drinking every single night. We were working in a shop in the day and a bar at night. And when the bar shut, the Aborigines would come in from the bush and we would drink and smoke and socialise with them. And the people we were working for were white. There was a huge amount of prejudice up there. And as we mixed with the black people, they didn't like it, basically. So we were due to work there 3 months. And after 6 weeks, we got fired. So they sacked us because we were making noise, we were partying at night time, and some other workers were doing it with us, but they actually chose to just sack my sister. And because I was her sister, they sacked me as well. So here we were in the middle of the bush with 6 weeks of wages when we should have had 3 months. We didn't really have enough money to go down the coast all the way to Perth, which is where we wanted to go. So we decided that we would just get on the next road train, which is like a truck that goes around Australia. There's official trucks. It's a bit like hitching, but it's a bit safer. So we decided to get on this truck, go to the next town, and just see if there were any jobs available. So we arrived and we got to the Backpackers and we walked up to the main street. It was a very small town and there was one bakery, and in the window there were notices about jobs and what was happening in the town, and we just looked at that to find a job. And then we saw this notice and it said, come and hear about the New Age movement, Shirley MacLaine, what happens when you die, and all sorts of things on there, Babylon, Rome and the New World Order. So we thought, hey, it sounds like a New Age meeting. Our spirit guides have led us here. So we decided that we'd go. It was starting the next night. And we were all excited, thinking that this was a providential happening. And so we went back to the Backpackers and somebody came in and asked if we'd like to work the next day. So we decided we'd go to work. So we went to work at this newspaper and we were folding newspapers all day. And while we were there, the 3 men that we were working with began to talk to us, and we began to witness to them about the New Age. We began to say that, you know, you're reincarnated, you get many lives. And one guy thought we were talking rubbish. Another one, he was a Christian, and he actually said, no, you get one life and then you're judged at the end of it. And we thought, oh no, he's a Christian. That's how prejudiced we were. And so we began to really tell him that no, he was wrong, and this was not what you should believe, and you should, you know, think about this more closely. And then he mentioned the meeting, and he said, are you going to this meeting tonight? And we said, yes, why are you going? And he sort of diverted the question. We said, is it Christian? And he said, there's a free vegetarian meal. Now, we loved our food, and there was no such thing as a free meal. When we're traveling, we had to pay for everything. And so we thought, well, there's a free meal, maybe we'll go. At the end of the day, we were so tired. The other guy who we were working with, who thought we were all talking rubbish, just said, he was a total atheist. He just said, meet me in the bar afterwards, let's go for a drink. So after working all day, we thought, you know what, we'll just go for the meal and then we'll go for a drink. So we walk into this place. We're wearing shorts and t-shirts and jewellery and makeup, and we walk in and there's these women in long dresses with no makeup and jewellery, and we're looking at them going, these people don't look like New Age people. So we were a bit skeptical to start with. So we sit down and then this man starts to do this slide presentation, and he's talking about archaeology and history, and he's going all over the place, and we didn't have a clue what he was talking about until he got to the point in the slideshow where he put up this picture of a statue. And he said, in the Bible, the prophet Daniel had this dream 2,000 years ago, and he dreamt of this statue. Well, actually, he said that this king of Babylon had a dream, but Daniel interpreted the dream for this king. And he went through what the dream means. And he went through the different rise and falls of the empire, and how the Bible teaches that these empires would rise and fall. And then we'd get right down to the bottom of the image, and this stone would hit the image, and that's Jesus' second coming. And at the time when these nations are split up, the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths and all these Roman empires, and they would try and unite all through time, and then Jesus would come back. And I had done English degree at university, but part of that I had to do a history module on barbarian history. I didn't want to do it, and at the time it was really boring, but I knew that what he was saying was true about the breaking up of the Roman Empire into the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths. I knew all these tribes, I knew it was true, and I sat there thinking, how could anybody know this was going to happen 2,000 years before it happened? And I had read the Gospels at school. We had to learn them to do exams at the Catholic school I went to, but I never knew anything about the Old Testament. And I'm sitting there thinking, why has nobody ever told me that this is in the Bible? So we're both under conviction that there's something in this book. So we come out of this meeting and we go to the food table, and there's all this vegetarian food, and we loved vegetarian food because we were vegetarian, but there was vegan food. There were no milk and eggs and cheese, and it was really tasty. We were asking them, you know, how did you make this? What? And we hadn't had a decent meal in weeks because we were living in the bush, and it was all fast food. And so for us, it was just it was a feast. And then they came and they gave us a free seminar Bible, you know, a big hardback Bible. And in all our traveling, no one had ever given us anything for free. And so we were just touched by these people. They were so friendly and so kind. It was like the love of Jesus shone out from them. And we ate this food and we asked them question after question. And they could see, I mean, this was late in the evening. They said, look, you've got so many questions. Why don't you come to our house tomorrow? So we left. We said, okay. So we left the meeting and we went past the bar, and our favorite music, rock music. We loved heavy rock music. And it was blaring out of this bar. And we walked past and we said, we just can't go in there. And it was like we were under conviction, this is the truth. And we went and we sat on a bench in the park, and there were stars out, and we looked up at the stars and we said, there is a God in heaven. And it was like, it was such a conviction. We were both so strongly impressed that there really is a God, and that we've got to look at these prophecies. So we go back to the backpackers and we start telling everybody there about this God, about this thing we've just heard, and they thought we were nuts. We started telling them about Daniel interpreting this dream. And so the next day, we went back to the people's house, and they were so lovely to us. They every question we asked them, they just picked up the Bible and they showed us what God said about it in the Bible. And we had loads of questions. And the major one that many people have is, well, if there's a God in heaven, why is there so much suffering? And they showed us how there is a Satan, there is a real devil. And they explained the whole great controversy that's going on between Christ and Satan. And to us, it was a complete revelation. It was like, this makes sense. And all the things that we thought God had done, we realized that there was a real devil, and he was responsible for all the wickedness, the sin, the evil that's going on in this world. So that was amazing. And then they said, and we asked about everlasting burning hell. And they began to explain from the Bible how that's not actually what the Bible teaches. And it was a complete relief to find out that there isn't an everlasting burning hell. And then we went all day with them, and our heads were spinning. It was like every question they just answered. And the people that were answering the question, it was an older man and a young man who'd recently become a Christian. At this point, we realized they were Christians, but we didn't know what type of Christians. But this old man had driven all the way up from Adelaide, which is the whole distance of Australia, up to the Northern Territory where these meetings were, with this young man. And twice, they had come up just to help with these meetings. Twice the axle had broken on their car. And they realized that this was completely satanic, because once is freaky enough, but the second time it happened, they just couldn't believe it. And they knew there must be a special reason why they had to come to these meetings. And the people that were giving the meetings, there were only about 4 families, and they were working in the daytime, so they spent this old man and this young man spent all day with us answering our questions. So it was like God had put them there especially for this time. The other remarkable thing is that these meetings were not supposed to be held that week. The pastor had cancelled some meetings at the last minute. They got cancelled. I don't know why. The church had cancelled them about 300 miles away. And he thought, why don't I go and visit these believers? There was only 4 families in the town. They didn't even have a church building. And he thought, well, I'll just go up and visit them. And while I'm there, I'll put on some meetings, and we'll just put a notice up in the baker's window. If somebody comes, they come. So me and my sister weren't meant to be there because we just got fired from our jobs. We were supposed to be in another town for the whole 3 months. So we get to these meetings that weren't even supposed to be there, and they put them on at the last minute, and we saw this notice in the baker's window. So, and when I look back at that, I just think, what will God not do for people when he went to those lengths to get us to those meetings? And it really touches my heart when I think about it, because I have so many friends and family members who are still not Christian, and I think, you know, he is doing everything he can to get those people to listen and to wake up. So it was just the right timing. Everything was perfect. And so for 5 nights we went to these meetings. And the 3rd night they explained how the New Age movement comes from the devil, and how it started in the Garden of Eden. And they told how Adam and Eve were in the garden, and the serpent came to them, and the serpent was the first channel. It allowed Satan to use its body to speak to Adam and Eve, to speak to Eve. And the 2 lies that the serpent told are the lies that are continually perpetuated in New Age. The first one is, if you eat this tree of knowledge of good and evil, you shall become as God. And that's what New Age teaches. It teaches that we all are God, and we don't just have God within us, we are God. And if we meditate enough, we will become as gods. And the second thing it says is, if you eat this fruit, you shall not surely die. The serpent lied to Eve, or Satan lied to Eve in the garden and said, if you eat this, you won't die. And it was a complete lie. And New Age teaches that we don't die. We keep on reincarnating. So we never die. We keep on getting better and better. And when we saw this, we realized that we have to get rid of all our New Age books, our New Age tapes, our music. So we threw them all away. We were under conviction that this is truth and that we need to follow it. And so that was I think that was the second meeting. The third night, they talked about how the papacy is the beast power. They put this video on for us and they said, "Are you Catholic?" And we said, "Well, we were brought up Catholic, but we're really not pro-Catholicism." And so they said, "Well, maybe you shouldn't see this video," but we were quite excited because we just wanted to find out what the truth was about Christianity. And so they put the video on and we watched it, and we couldn't believe what the Bible says about Catholicism. It's Babylon. Basically, it's the biggest occult system on the planet, that it's professing to be Christian, and yet it's so far from God that its teachings are not based on the Bible, they're based on human tradition, and that the Pope is really placing himself in place of Christ, so he is like Antichrist. And we were just shocked, but at the same time I was relieved, because I knew there was something wrong with Catholicism. All that time ago when we went to the Vatican, neither of us felt comfortable with it, and we knew there was something wrong with it. So when we saw that God said it was wrong, it was like a relief. Even God says this isn't a Christian system. And so straight away we accepted it, but I was sad as well, because my dad is a very faithful Catholic, and I just felt upset for all these people that are deceived by this system, thinking that they're doing what God wants them to do and what Jesus wants them to do, and they're not. They're in deception, basically. And that's not to say that God has many people in the Catholic Church who love him sincerely, and my heart goes out to them, because I just think, how can you serve a God when you believe such wrong things about him, and yet they still love God? So to me, it's a miracle that anyone's a faithful Catholic, but there are plenty of faithful Catholics out there, and my dad is one of them. And so we came out of that thinking, we need to read more about this. And they gave us this book called The Great Controversy. And if you've never read that book, I really recommend that you read it, because it puts in perspective what's happening in our world and why it's happening. So many times things happen and we don't understand them. But when I started reading this book, I began to realize that it all makes sense. It like fell into place, that there is true spiritual warfare around us. And if our eyes could be opened, we would really see how bad this warfare is. So we began to read this book, and we also began to read another book on diets and food, Counsels on Diets and Food, which is an excellent book about what we should be eating and how we should live our lifestyle. And so I remember we read about cheese, how bad it was for you and how it shouldn't even enter the lips. And there we had just bought a block of cheese, and we were sitting there debating, should we eat this cheese, should we not eat this cheese? I can't even remember now whether we ate the cheese or not, but we were convicted that everything we were reading, we should just put it into practice, because we realized there was a God. We wanted to serve him. I had always wanted to serve God deep down, and I just thought, this makes sense. I need to look into it. So we was going home, checking what they were saying to us and reading the books they were giving us. By the end of the week, it was a Friday, we had decided we were just going to leave town and go on to the next place and try and get work, because again, we had money problems. The people were anxious that we didn't just leave, and so they were praying that we would stay. So we went down to find a road train to take us to the next town, and there wasn't anything going till the Monday. This was the Friday. And they had really prayed that we would stay and keep our first Sabbath with them. They had told us about the Sabbath, and we had accepted it because we realized where Sunday came from and the history of Sunday keeping and how it came into the Christian church through Roman Catholicism. And so we saw that if this is something that Roman Catholicism uses and it's a mark of their authority, then we don't want anything to do with it. So we saw that the Bible teaches that the Sabbath is the seventh day, and we had decided that we were going to start keeping the Sabbath. And they really wanted us to stay and keep Sabbath with them. So we kept our first Sabbath. And they didn't even have a pastor. They don't even have a church. So we were in someone's living room and we watched a video of George Vanderman. That was our first sermon. And it got to the point where we had lunch and everybody ate together. And we just couldn't believe how these families were spending the whole day together. This wasn't just going to church and going home again. This was doing church, doing lunch, going for a walk. Everybody went for a walk. And then when Sabbath went out, we played this Bible game and we watched the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. And to us, this was like Christmas. Our family does sit down for meals most of the time together, but we're off doing our own thing. And we don't spend the day together like that unless it's a real special occasion like Christmas or a birthday. And so we said, you do this every week? It was like, we couldn't believe that people would have this blessing every week. They'd spend time together. And it was such a joy to mingle with these people who had such peace and such joy in their lives that we had not before found. And so by the end of the week, I think the last meeting they had preached was about Christ. And my sister was under such conviction that there is a there is a Saviour, and she needed him. She was in tears most of the time. She was broken, and she gave her heart to Christ at the end of the week, I think. And I was more intellectually converted. I realized the truth of the thing. I loved the great controversy and all the intricacies of the battle between Christ and Satan. But I think at that point I didn't see my need of Jesus like my sister did. She was at rock bottom. She was depressed severely, and I was getting to the point before we went to these meetings of desperation, thinking, how am I going to get her out of this depression? Because there was nothing I could do that seemed to be able to cheer her up. And afterwards, she did admit that if she had not become a Christian, then she thinks she would have been an alcoholic. Because for 6 weeks up to that point, we were drinking every single night and smoking some of the time. She was smoking more than I was. But when the night we went to that first meeting, we couldn't go in that bar, and we talked about it being the truth. It was like God took the need away. So then we said, from that point on, we never smoked or drank again. It was like we didn't have to do it anymore. We'd found some answers. There was a reason for life. So why do we need to drink and smoke? It was like an immediate release. And at the end of the week, we kept the Sabbath, and then we decided to travel to the next place. And so they gave us an address of someone to stay with in the next town so that we could save money by staying with people, basically. So God just provided our needs. We went down the coast of Australia, and we stayed at 2 different places on the way to Perth. And with Adventists, then we found out that they were Seventh-day Adventists, and we committed that what they had told us so far we thought was good, and it was based on the Bible. So the places we went, we asked them different questions. The next place we went, the pastor did a sermon on jewelry, and we at that time were wearing quite a lot of jewelry. And when he did this sermon, how God wants us to be adorned on the inside and not, outwardly, that these were a distraction, we don't need to do it. It was a liberation to us. It was almost like we were in bondage. We drank, we smoked, we wore jewelry, we wore makeup because we had to, and we felt that society was telling us we had to do these things to be accepted. So it was a real relief to find out we don't have to do these things because God loves us the way we are. So I had really found assurance that there was a God and he loved me, and it didn't matter what anybody else thought of me. If he was approving, that was okay, because I'd always wanted God's approval. And so when we saw that God says that jewelry is not the best thing to do, well, we decided we'd just throw out all our jewelry. So we threw out all our jewelry, and I remember being on the train with my sister. She had this big ring, and it was silver with black onyx in it, and it was bought, I think it was bought for her 21st birthday. And she was really debating, should I get rid of this ring or not? And so when we got on this train, we did a train journey across the desert. She decided, okay, that's it, I'm going to get rid of this ring. So she threw it on the train, where it was unretrievable when we got off this train. So some things were more of a struggle, but I can honestly say that most of those outward things, they just fell away. Then we went to the next place, and at that place the family told us all about rock music. They put on videos about how rock music is from the Satan, and there's a lot of backmasking in the rock music which gives you bad messages about suicide and satanic evil things. And we realized that the beat was very controlling, that it damages your mind and makes you think about wicked things and overrides your emotion. Very similar to getting drunk. You're out of control when you listen to very heavy rock music continually, like at concerts where it's very loud. And this whole DVD just showed how a lot of the rock artists have given themselves to Satan, and they're actually demon possessed. So we were shocked, and we just thought, okay, that's it with rock music. So we got our rock music tapes and we threw them out. And then we travelled on to Perth, where the pastor was from, who had given the meetings in the Northern Territory. And he said, come and stay with me. So we went to stay with him. This was 6 weeks after we'd first heard the message in Kununurra. And as we were staying with him, this pastor, who is never sick, was ill. He wasn't so ill that he couldn't walk around, but he didn't go out the house. So for 4 days, he was studying with us. He showed us a whole series of videos by Kenneth Cox called Dimensions of Prophecy. We watched all these videos in about 3 days. And then at the end of the 3rd day, he said, do you want to be baptized? Now, we had been sprinkled as children, so we thought we were already baptized. But he explained that baptism was by immersion. We'd seen the video by Kenneth Cox. So we began to realize that to give your heart to God and to follow Christ wholly, you needed to be baptized. So we said, well, we don't know everything. And he was assuring us that if you want to follow God and you want to do what he says and you love Jesus, you don't have to know everything, because God will teach you. So we decided we would be baptized. So 6 weeks after we'd first heard it, we were baptized in his church. They all came together and they bought flowers, and it was just a wonderful experience. Our faces ached at the end of the day because we had been smiling so much. That's probably how little we smiled before. But we came out of that, and then we travelled on across the desert. And I remember this desire to share Christ was so strong that we had picked up lots of tracks from him about rock music and different things, and we no longer we had any desire to listen to that kind of music anymore. It was like a complete liberation on that front as well. And we're sitting on the train, and this girl in front of us had the Sony Walkman earphones on, and she was listening to really beaty music, and we could hear this beat. And we're sitting there looking at each other saying, you give her the tract. No, you give her the tract. Because we had this tract on rock music, and it was like neither of us wanted to be embarrassed by giving it to her and having her say no. Anyway, I can't remember in the end who. It was probably my sister, because she was a bit braver than I was. And I think she gave her the tract. So, and then the joy of seeing this girl switch off her music and read this tract. And actually, she switched it off after she'd finished the tract, and she turned around. It was all about the satanic roots of rock and roll, how the Beatles were on drugs, and how that's where rock and roll began to start, and then how heavy rock, how it developed. And she said, "Thank you so much for giving me this." And she was really pleased, and she started to explain how she was open to Christianity, but her brother had got involved in a Pentecostal church and had gone a bit strange. So we shared what we knew about Christ, and by the time she got off that, she was very badly, severely burnt down the side of her face. And after we'd spoken to her, she was so joyful. She said, "I'm going to look into this, I'm going to follow this." And when she got off the train, we were just rejoicing. And we had so many testimonies like that. And I just think God, when you first become a Christian, he really blesses your experience, and he just answers your prayers so dramatically that you can't gainsay that he's real. And we were sitting on the train, and this was a long train journey. It was something like 10 hours across the desert to Perth to Adelaide. And I think it was actually a Sabbath, but we didn't know much about how to keep Sabbath properly at this point. And so we were on this journey, and we had all this bundle of tracts, and we thought, how can we give these out to these people on the train without being thrown off the train for upsetting people? And so we prayed, and within 5 minutes of praying, the train drew to a halt in the middle of the desert, and the driver announced that there was a dead animal on the train down the line, and that they would have to move it, so it would take some time so everybody could get out the train and stretch their legs. So we were rejoicing. We were going, look at that answer to prayer. All these people got off the train, and we got back on. We got off the train, then we got back on at the end of the train, and we went down the whole train putting tracts on everybody's seats because everybody was outside. So when they got back on the train, we're sitting there looking, and they're all picking up these tracts, like looking around like, who put this here? And they began to read them, and we saw at least 6 or 7 people around us reading these tracts. So we were earnestly praying that God would bless this seed that we had sown. So we had many experiences like that. And then we got to Melbourne, and we stayed with people there, and that's when we began to see that there were differences in what people were saying and believing. And we had, as I say, we had read Great Controversy, we had read Counsels on Diets and Foods, or a lot of it, and we knew that we had made a decision. We weren't eating cheese, we were not going to drink milk, because this is what the prophet says. So we get to this elder's house, and they're eating cheese and they're drinking milk, and so we asked them questions, and they said, well, we don't have to do that yet. There's maybe a time will come, but we don't feel you have to do that right now, and it's not important. And we had questions. We began to think, well, hang on a minute, if this is what it says, why aren't we doing it? It was just like, it was clear to us that we should be doing it. And then we go to the church, and there's somebody playing drums. And my sister looks at me, and we think, well, what's drums doing in the church? We know this beat is from rock music. And the elder made this joke about all those devilish drums, eh? And we both sat there thinking, well, they are devilish. Why is this elder joking about it? So we began to see how the churches where we were going to, different ones, had different standards. People were different. They were not following all the counsel. And so we had questions. And then we flew to New Zealand. And when we got to New Zealand, we went into the biggest church in Auckland, and they had a drum kit on the podium. They had this pastor preaching about the crucifixion of Christ, and during the sermon they had a huge 6-foot cross there, and he got his elders to come in with real nails and bang these nails into this cross. And it was emphasizing how guilty we are, how sinful, how wicked. And we just thought, what's he talking about? This is like a Catholic sermon. There was no joy, there was no hope in Christ. And then he asked us to give our testimony, because we had been in the Sabbath school with him. Oh, that was the first confusion. We went into Sabbath school, and here the pastor was teaching. This was the pastor took the Sabbath school we went to, and he was saying there's 2 types of speaking in tongues. One is from God, and no, they're both from God. One is languages, and one is this kind of gibberish that the Holy Spirit gives you, but it makes you feel good. And we sat there thinking, we were brought in to believe that, tongues was a language, because at Pentecost, when it was given, it was for evangelism. That's why it was there. And so we had questions, and we were confused. And then 2 women stood up and said that they had the gift of speaking in tongues. When they run out of words to praise God, the Spirit takes over, and they go into this gibberish. And so afterwards, the people we were staying with, we asked them, and these women were long-term Adventists, but they spoke in tongues. And we were confused. We came out of that Sabbath school class. We'd only been baptized about 4 weeks at this point, and we knew this wasn't right. So we go into the whole service, and this drum is playing so loud, this drum kit, a rock beat, that you couldn't hear 300 people in the congregation singing. So we're looking at each other going, why is rock music in the church? And it was like nobody had to tell us that these things were wrong, but because of our experience, we knew these things were satanic. And so we realized at that point that there are problems in this church. There is apostasy going on. There were different things being said that we didn't agree with already, even though we were so newly baptized. And it was at that point that a lady came to speak to us, and she explained how, if this is the true church of God, will it not be under attack by Satan? And that we need to pray for people, and that we need to see that not everything is perfect in this church. Because I think we had this idea that when we become Christians and we join this church, it's all going to be wonderful. Everything's going to be marvelous. We're going to have no more problems, and God's going to take care of everything. And then the reality set in that this is not a perfect church, that there are problems in it, but we need to pray earnestly for people and recognize that our colleges, our churches, everything is under attack by Satan, and that each one of us needs to guard ourselves against that. And so it made us feel much better. She invited us to lunch, and God really helped us deal with these issues that we were facing. So we ended up traveling back to America and studying a Bible worker course there, and we flew back to England. And then we got involved in evangelism, and we began to give out Great Controversy. We were doing Bible studies, and it was a real blessing. It was like, and then we had changed our dress, because we believed that we should dress modestly, that we should dress as women, so we were wearing dresses. And this made an impression on my parents. I don't think they knew what hit them when they saw us, because they thought they looked different, and we had joined this weird church in their eyes, and so they were kind of, oh, what's going on? And I remember going for a walk with a dress on, and my mum was saying this was ridiculous. But anyway, they have since been really, really open to us sharing with them, and it's been a real blessing. And I think it's brought my sister and I obviously closer together because we're Christians, but we just have such a strong desire for them that they can share in the joy that we have. And this is what God does to you when he turns your life completely upside down, and he shows you how much he loves you. And as you settle into that love, you recognize that he has a plan for your life that's so exciting and so wonderful, that in spite of all the trials and the obstacles, and we faced many trials on our experience, and they were unexpected, because we just thought everything would be plain sailing. But when the trials began to happen was when I began to really see my need of Jesus. And I remember just crying out to him to give me victory over this thing I was struggling with. And it was when I began to struggle with sin in my life that I saw my need of Jesus, and that's when I was fully broken, I think. And we all need to be broken on that rock, because we can go along, everything's fine in our Christian experience, and we think we've got this walk with God, but we're not deep down rooted and grounded in Christ. And that takes effort. It takes a diligent study life. It takes prayer life. It takes reading the books that we've been given, the testimonies, to rebuke us and convict us of those sins. And I just see that the blessing of the spirit of prophecy, this gift, is so powerful to this church. And it's one of the most grievous things I find, to go around and people not reading these books and not studying them and not practicing them, because it's all for our benefit. It's such a blessing. And so I'd like to leave you with the thought that God has a plan for your life. If you are already a Christian or a Seventh-day Adventist, I really encourage you to study the Bible for yourself, to check what people are telling you, to study the spirit of prophecy for yourself. Don't be put off by what anybody says or what anybody does, because I was convicted very early on in my Christian walk when we cried out to God and we said, where are your people? And he said, you have to be like Christ. You have to be the example to other people. So if you see people doing all kinds of things, you have to recognize that God is dealing with people on an individual level, and that he wants you to be a Christian to them, an example to them, even to your brothers and sisters who are supposed to know Christ already. And if you're not a Christian, I would really encourage you to taste and see that the Lord is good, because God has a plan for your life that you can't even imagine. And I can say that the last I've been a Christian 15 years now, and it's been the most exciting, the most trying, the most joyful experience of my life, because it was like before I was walking in total darkness. There was a cloud over my heart all the time, and occasionally good things would happen, and then the sun came out. And when I found Christ, it was like the sun came out, and okay, sometimes it goes behind a cloud now, but I can go behind the cloud with Christ, and he gives me the strength and the grace and the energy to continue on this walk. So God bless you all, and may the Lord lead you into a walk with him, and don't let anybody put you off reading the Bible and finding out for yourself what God is like.